Hi, and welcome to Boom It's on the Blockchain. And we are into our 79th show, and we've got a special guest with us today, Julian Rodriguez from Memento. How are you, Julian?
Hey, good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, not a problem at all. We've had Julian in the past before speaking about his platform and what he's doing. And today we're going to discuss a little bit about the challenges facing NFTs. You know, during lockdown, it was like the whole world was going to become NFTs. Fast forward 3 years, like a lot of things in lockdown, like Peloton bikes and stuff like that, maybe not having the adoption that people once thought was going to happen. So, just to kick things off, give a bit of a background about yourself, Julian. I know we've spoken about before, and how you got into the space.
Yeah, so I'm the founder and CEO of Memento. We help content creators digitize and monetize. And our premier product was all around blockchains and NFTs. I've been in crypto for a long time, since about 2012. And in 2013, I worked with Vitalik Buterin at the Bitcoin magazine, where we released the Ethereum white paper as a 6-page spread in the magazine itself. Vitalik was the co-founder of the magazine, and so that kind of kicked everything off for me, right? And so I've been in technology since. This is my second venture-backed startup, and yeah, we're in interesting times for sure. Interesting times for sure.
Yeah, so before we talk about that, let's talk a little bit about, how do content creators make money from NFTs? Because I thought I'd look today and see which famous persons launched the latest round of NFTs, and believe it or not, it's Donald Trump's wife.
Hmm.
The 1776 special. Any money she earns there as well, apparently, is going to go to needy children. I didn't go into too much details. Perhaps a few dollars might go to the Trump 2024 campaign,
Yeah,
or
for sure.
she's maybe avoiding that. But they're using it ways to generate money, and now we're seeing like certain brands and that starting to launch NFTs. I see all the big sort of designer brands now come out with NFTs. Adidas, Nike, these companies have done NFTs in the past as well. So talk a little bit about how content creators can make money from NFTs in principle.
Yeah, so yeah, I think you bring up a great point. It's definitely been the bigger brands this year so far, 2023, that have really made the majority of the money when it comes from NFTs, right? And so essentially, what they're really doing is that they're leveraging that brand value that they've built up over the past decades, right? And so, kind of, this allowed them to reach out to their audience and monetize immediately. So the idea is that on a micro level, the individual content creator can do the same thing, right? And so what we saw on our platform were people, creating digital content in a fun and engaging way, um, placing that or minting that on the blockchain, pricing it, and sort of giving it out to their audience to create, right, sort of that sense of community, support, followership, fan engagement, and that's sort of what is kind of known as a phygital experience. So sometimes it was physical merchandise that was associated with the ownership. With athletes, we saw signed merchandise, jerseys, footballs, basketballs, etc. For some recording artists, it was actual physical copy of their latest CD, right? Posters, T-shirts, hats, etc. And so, we hosted a few live streams as well, right? So you can think of this as like just a video call, private video call. And so there were a bunch of different ways that people were sort of coming together to engage. But I think that really, in the case of NFTs, there's fundamentally nothing wrong with the technology or its use in a sort of theoretical sense, right? Like when you really think about what's possible, I think so the biggest casualty of like sort of crypto's winter has been NFTs, right? There's been really nothing that has been hit as hard as NFTs, and so today, when you think of the word NFT, or the general public does, it's kind of like equivalent to scam, right? And so once you get bad PR on that sort of a level, it's really hard to come back from. And so if you're an up and coming and emerging content creator, that's not the thing you want to attach your name to, right? You don't want your name and your brand or your fans to be exposed to anything related to a scam. And so that's really the been the big challenge around quote unquote adoption. Again, it's not because it's not useful text, not because it's not good ideas. It's just don't call it an NFT. Is essentially where we're at today. And so some people have moved to labeling it just digital collectibles. People kind of get it and know that it's the same thing. So any kind of concept similar to this, people are just staying far, far away from.
So, talking about your platform Memento, because originally it was called Memento NFTs, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So it was. So how are content creators generating revenue on your platform right now?
So there's still a couple of sort of legacy users, right? Content creators that are doing the same thing that they were doing. They've created embedded audiences that are okay and comfortable, right? I mean, the trust is there. So if you've already built the trust before, all these issues sort of came up, you're good, no problem. But we're not at scale, right? So like we don't have millions and millions of users, right? And so those network effects haven't been able to spread throughout the community. So getting new users to, for the first time, engage with NFTs, I think is extremely difficult. And right, we as a platform sort of we put the oneness on the creator themselves, right? I mean, they have the majority of the revenue they keep. They advertise themselves. They create the content. They invite their audience, right? So that's a lot of pressure to put on the content creators.
Right. Yeah, yeah. No, no. I understand that as well. It's just OpenSea is probably the biggest one that most people out there know about NFTs, specifically looking at art
Yeah,
and musics, things like that as well. I've minted a lot of NFTs. I minted my first 100, and it was all different types of art, like political type art type thing. It was called Bitcoin Libertarian. So I've got there, but then I was actually researching it there, and they were saying like 95% of NFTs that are created actually create zero value at all. There's
right.
only 5% that's actually making money. In my case, everybody, it's actually 100%.
Yeah, right.
So unfortunately, I've sold zero NFTs of what I've created so far, and I've stuck it on this big encyclopedia. But as time developed, I was never really looking for it to be a big money generator. It was just understand the technology and use it from there, and try and build up followers and what I'm looking to do. So it's an interesting model, and so if we think of art when it first came back, I think for most artists out there and they're upcoming artists, and again, very few artists make money, become
Right.
commercial
Yeah.
artists.
Sure.
The money is very difficult to make money as a commercial artist. But if you're making art and you suddenly start to hit a run, so people start to buy your work, the advantage of NFTs in terms of copyright ownership is better than actually just selling the piece of artwork. Because if I suddenly I'm selling my artwork to you and I've done a painting and I've sold it to Julian for say $100. Now next thing you know, I would develop some crypto and it becomes massive, and I become the next Vitalik. So it's so suddenly everything I do, like Elon Musk, everything he does is now worth millions
Sure.
because it's Elon Musk. Whether it's good or not, it's worth a lot of money because who he is. The problem that the artists face if they start selling that is all their early work that they've sold, they get no, you know, sort of credence or credibility in terms of getting any revenue stream from that piece of artwork. So you might have sold it for $100, now it's worth $40,000, but you've only sold it for 100, and the person who bought it 100 could go and sell it for 40,000. You get nothing. I think things like OpenSea opened your eyes in terms of you could put a 2.5%, 5% royalty in. That means every single time it gets sold, you get a little royalty rate from the resale value of that. So do you think artists are going to adopt that? And what's your thoughts on how that actually works?
I think artists and digital creatives definitely want some sort of different solution. Unfortunately, the problem they find themselves is they don't have the leverage on traditional social media to see those changes enacted or have those changes created for them, right? So, like, they're very dependent. so specifically, creators are dependent on the platform that they were first born on, and so right, whether that's Instagram or TikTok or Twitter, right? That's kind of how they relate, or YouTube, right? And so they have a very specific goal. It's make good quality, catchy content on the platform so that they can maximize distribution on the platform. How those platforms decide to compensate them is up to those platforms, and that's really the problem. But eventually, they just kind of get used to it, right? Like Mr. Beast is totally used to YouTube's way, and he has become fabulously wealthy because he figured out what YouTube expected from him and how to do well on YouTube. He doesn't do well anywhere else, right? Charlie D'Amelio figured it out on TikTok, right? She doesn't do well anywhere else. And so that's pretty much the world that we live in today, and that's what we see. What I think the next stage is there's one caveat. So, for example, on Twitter, people who have real and ample presences, like in the real world, do extremely well on Twitter, right? They don't necessarily do well anywhere else, Instagram, TikTok, but they do really well on Twitter. And so that's an example of, I think, sort of like a cross, like real world presence audience to sort of digital audience. And I think now we're going into another sort of generation where blockchain maybe didn't exactly get us there, but got us halfway there. And I think that the other half is now in the beginning of its hype cycle, which I know you've heard a lot of. Right, AI, right? And so I think that when you put AI together with the tenets and philosophies of blockchain, decentralization, ownership, and privacy, now is when you really start to see this new generation of content creator and content creator monetization. Because essentially AI, when you really think about it, are like PEDs for content creators, right? So steroids, right? Performance enhancing drugs for content creators. And so it allows them to keep the scale and pace and intensity in a new and engaging way. So I think when you combine the two, to allow the horse to run the whole race and increase the amphitheater, the racetrack, now we're talking about something new. And so those are some of the things that we are now digging deeply into.
Yeah, I know. I've had a couple of guests on the show as well who are content creators, and they've started to use AI now as well. And the stuff they're creating, they're basically saying the stuff that would take them, and they still put a lot of work into what they create using AI. People just think it just automatically comes itself, but
No.
it's essentially your knowledge of the subject area, your knowledge of art, to basically describe what you want, and then to take the AI content and then tweak it themselves when it goes into that digital place. But, they're talking about artwork that would, potentially take them a month to do. Now they can essentially do that in 1 or 2 days. It can come instantaneously, but then they have to fix it so it actually comes there. It never works right,
No, so I don't know if you noticed, I like speaking in sort of analogies. I think the whole world is analogous. And so this is like asking, hey, is it hard to fish with a net, right? Like, sure, it's easier than fishing with a spear, but it's still hard, right? You'll be much more productive if you use a net instead of a spear. But it still has its own entire set of difficulties, right? Fishing is not easy, but you use tools that make your task significantly easier, and you get better and better rewards, right? And that's where we are with AI.
Yeah, that's interesting as well. So we think about why NFTs haven't worked, So if you think of like one of the big ones people talk about is like the security risks, So to me, it's like the first thing. Well, what is the security risk of an NFT? Is it the same as the security risk of acquiring Bitcoin, or what would you say?
So I guess when you say security risk, what are you referring to specifically?
sort of the security risk of having ownership of these NFTs, and then sort of the legal side of things, the copyright side of things, all that piece of it that's there. It's like, it puts a lot of people at using it because of it. It's like, why do people not want to use crypto in digital wallets? Because they're afraid. You know what I mean? So does NFTs come into that thing as well that stops a massive adoption of the technology, or what do you think?
So it's kind of just like what I mentioned earlier. To me, I think the only real big problem right now is a toxic branding problem, not a technical problem. But yeah, I mean, the risks are always there. I mean, you could lose your keys. Those are the loss of your own ownership, right? Ownership, you're accountable for your own ownership when you're dealing with blockchain, right, or NFTs. The difference there is just, I think it's less than the risk of doing things than like the normal traditional way. You still you lose your password, but you could recover it. But you could get hacked, or your entire account could be closed, unbeknownst to you, right? So you still have you have even bigger risk in other ways, right? But it's just like I don't know. Technically speaking, what's safer, credit card or cash in your pocket, right? And so all things crypto are essentially digital cash in your digital pocket, right? And so there's a certain level of accountability involved in that. And to sort of bring it back to what we're talking about, I think so far the past 5 years have proven that everyone is not exactly ready for that level of accountability on the internet, right? Now, will that change? I think so, and obviously, right, like you think so. But we have pointers that show that, right? I mean, the generation that is growing up now, Gen Alpha, is spending almost all of their time in the virtual world. I mean, there are literally videos of kids who forgot how to play outside. Like they don't know what to do when they're outside, right? And so I think that those people are going to depend on more digital toolings and digital strategies. That again, I mean, just online ownership is just like the default, right? We don't really have to overthink it too much. That's the world that they're going to be living in. But now I think the problem that I think we're seeing is what are we doing to create value now, right? Because that's a very clear 10 years from now, as that generation matures, maybe even 20 years to when they're deep in their careers. But where's the value generation now in the next 2 years, 5 years, right? And that's where I think, unfortunately, like I said, we are in a crypto winter for sure. And typically that it's always been around 2.5 years every crypto winter. So, right. Yeah.
So you think a bit more about, the sort of investors for people having collectibles in NFTs as well. I don't think there was, when it first started, you had one of the, Jake Paul, his brother. I'm trying to think what his name is right now. He
Logan.
was Logan Paul. He was a guy who was on in his podcast telling everyone he's making millions from NFTs.
Yeah.
Fast forward 2 years and he's lost millions in NFTs.
Mhm.
He's probably the most famous person to lose as much money, but then he was the one boasting about how much money he was making in the first place. So,
Right. Yeah.
like a high profile person. Do you think part of the problem was that there was a lot of creators for NFTs, but there wasn't many investors for people doing collectibles into it?
So I think what happened was really just a psychotic hype machine, right? Where I think the people involved were more motivated not by evangelizing the tech or the technology itself or solving problems for someone else. Right? Those are like three crucial components that you can build industries around and will work. I think the majority of people were just concerned in profiteering, and there is no sort of at scale market that just works based on the pure intent to profiteer. Right. So like even when you look at like the stock exchange, that's not exactly what's happening. These are publicly traded companies with cash flows and revenue, right? And so people are speculating on the future or competitiveness of those different companies that create value. But when you're just kind of speculating for just pure financial gain, that's when things spin out of control. I mean, because essentially there's nothing like the next person in the chain, all he can do is, develop some bigger claim, right? There's nothing that there's nothing else that he can do. So every player in the industry has to sort of one up the idea that no, actually this is better, or this will make you richer, right? And it sort of never sort of ties back down. I think the past 2 years, startups and players in the industry were trying to develop uh, value, right, and build an industry around the hype, and it sort of unfortunately didn't materialize in the way that everyone expected. And so that's where I think the discrepancy in value or wealth is. And eventually a market can only handle so much, right? So when you have a drawdown of right 80, 70, 75%, you have to know that you're going to hurt a lot of people, or a lot of people are going to get disillusioned, and they're going to decide to not come back. And I just think that's what's happened.
Yeah, so the NFTs basically follow, say, Bitcoin price. Every Bitcoin price up at 75, 80,000. Next thing it goes away down less than 20. Suddenly, it's starting to, well, now you're looking at sort of your BlackRock, Vanguard, Deutsche Bank, these companies now get into Bitcoin ETFs. Suddenly, institutional money's coming into Bitcoin at a price that they like, and they're now going to start running the market. If Bitcoin and crypto does better, do you believe the NFT market's going to start to take off again?
Yeah, for sure. I think, right. So everything follows Bitcoin, right? Like everything. And so I think that once the market builds back up its confidence and there is more money sort of sloshing around, more individuals will think of exciting ways to push the agenda of what we're doing on the internet. And the majority of those will not be nefarious, right? They're not thinking about getting getting rich quick, or doing things like that. It's the third or fourth person in the chain that sort of inevitably ends up doing that, right? And so eventually, you get this glut of people, and if, like I mentioned before, if there's no value that they can point at, it then just goes off the rails, right? It just gets out of control. So what will the next phase of NFTs look like, right? In 2 or 3 years, or however long it takes? I'm not exactly sure. Will we learn from our mistakes? That's on all of us, right? Like, we have to sort of move forward and do that. I'm hoping we do, right? At the same time, I'm hoping that people who did well don't age out, right? There are people now who have spent a decade or more in and around crypto, right? And those people either made what they were going to make, or they're not going to make anything, and they might be aging out of sort of, I guess, the tech cycle, and focusing on other things in their life, right? Might be entering a later stage of their life and have a different focus. And so, right, maybe every 15 to 20 years, the sort of industry sort of remakes itself, right? And so I'm really not sure, because of all of those things. I'm not sure what the future of crypto or NFTs really hold. But I think that, again, I mean, I've never questioned the technology or the validity of the technology. I think, again, we're just in a branding black hole, right? It's just like a toxic vortex that we unfortunately find ourselves in right now.
Yeah, so you're thinking, what other use cases for NFTs that have you found interesting? Because one of the things that we've been working on is obviously tokenization of energy assets. So, in the States, we were the first company that tokenized well interests and tokenized the production of oil. And, I worked with the founders of the original oil coin. So we developed this product, Zion Coin. Essentially, when we tokenized energy assets, we did something that was so unique, but it was the market wasn't ready for it and wasn't interested in it. It was like, and I've pitched it to like Saudi Aramco, people in Shell, and these are people in the tech divisions in these companies, the blockchain divisions of these companies. So they're aware of this model of tokenization of energy assets. But one of the things that and then we got into that point whereby we wanted to tokenize everything. So every barrel of oil we had, we essentially tokenized it, put it on hash it on the blockchain, showed the ownership, went through the life cycle of it, and it was super interesting. The problem was it was like you don't actually need to tokenize every barrel of oil on the blockchain, even though at the time it was just super interesting of this process, and we created a platform to do it and created this way. And then we started to develop the concept of, well, if we actually take the assets themselves and allow through tokenization people having fractional interest into these oil projects, that's becoming more interesting because it's sort of developing the model. And the other thing I've been working with new developers from India is through NFTs is essentially to do it with tracking of carbon emissions of oil wells as NFTs. Now, we can track down to a granular level the carbon emissions of, say, the production of a producing well for a month. And then that would be the carbon emissions. And then we would hash that, we convert that into an NFT, hash it, and then allow the operator to essentially buy carbon credits to offset the CO2 emissions of that particular energy asset. So what that does is it allows people to essentially track the emissions using NFTs, because suddenly you're putting on a blockchain of all the process, but it also creates a system whereby they can now show that the carbon emissions, what they're doing compared to, like, it's maybe more sort of toxic or more carbon not friendly oil production, but also provide a mechanism for people to use carbon credits and actually make it work. So you're essentially creating, ultimately it's not creating green oil, it's just creating net zero oil there as well. But creating NFTs for it's actually a good mechanism, because essentially what it does is it does that process of transparency, and it makes it, and it also what it does do is, you can track carbon emissions anyway, okay? But the thing is, if you're converting it to an NFT, you've put it in essentially a token, a non-fungible token, and this non-fungible token is now on the blockchain, and this non-fungible token is it's transparent for people to see, but it's now in a format that you can actually acquire carbon credits that are also, say for planting trees or whatever else the process is, that you can actually do this thing to write it off. Now, airlines and that have been doing this for years. We're just finding this as a mechanism to work. And really, it's just doing what we've done in the past, but it just brings this transparency aspect to the energy industry in a granular level. And that's us trying to use NFTs. And the NFTs, because of this, becomes a tool that can create this transparency piece. You see what we were trying to do with this, Julian,
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's two things there, right? So the first one is very clear. I think, like, just on a basic, let's say, pitch or sales level, I think maybe even just mentioning NFTs might just be hurting the other people's ability to understand what you guys are doing. Maybe just using the word, right, token or just blockchain may be better. But I think the bigger thing here is, something that people don't really talk about most of the time is that the actual sort of like underlying premise of capitalism as a whole has never actually been decentralized, right? It's predicated on the fact that they're kind of insiders who bring insider money and develop industry, right? It's that kind of like one big dude. So, for example, it took an Elon Musk to create Tesla, right? In what could arguably be considered a cartel of gasoline-related, motorized industry. It took this one Silicon Valley insider with 200 million of his own dollars, right, and his network and partnerships to, stick his foot in the door, and then still took 8 to 10 years to develop that business into something that then made some sort of an impact, right? And we're still seeing, right, like, I mean, when it comes to media and publicity, his company is out. It has a largely outpaced view of itself. But when it comes down to number of cars and adoptions, it's still fractional, right? Like it's really not significant. And so imagine, right? I think that that is the challenge that we're really seeing when we think about building blockchain businesses. And so I think we're in that sort of natural progression where we're getting there, right? BlackRock doing this and getting their hands submersed in Bitcoin is definitely something that would work, right? So you can imagine maybe not them as a firm, but other people who maybe work there or are related or manage money for them or with them eventually now feels more comfortable investing in a company that's started by someone that wants to do this, right? But that's essentially how it starts. I think it's a slow trickle. I don't think it's a eureka moment for global industry, right? So like Saudi Aramco, uh, even if everyone were telling them that this was a great solution, I don't think they would ever pull the trigger. I mean, just let's just think about that company as a whole, right? It's run by a kingdom, which is run by a king, right? And they're the ones that sort of own and operate this business. So it's super centralized, right? So I think everything that we talk about when we talk about blockchain and or NFTs, I'm not sure that different segments of the global industry are interested in that level of decentralization and transparency, right? Things that we think are great and are good, right? They develop industry and sort of open industries to the general financial benefit of a larger group of people. But I just don't think that in general industry is that interested in that actually happening. So I guess those are kind of my views.
Yeah, because it's, I know that you've got, if blockchain for energy is based out of Houston, and you've got every major operator in the world now involved in this, and they're all using technology. And the reason why they're going into these technologies, initially it was smart contracts. Now, why would they want to use smart contracts is because, as you say, if you're turning over $400 billion or $500 billion, like someone like Shell, and they're thinking we can save 11% of our fixed costs, it's a lot of money because essentially through smart contracts, we can get rid of all the people who work in the back office,
Right.
So it's an accounting. It's basically like using, and it's as you say, it's like AI, because essentially what you're doing with a smart contract is you're using AI through a smart contract to get rid of all the people in the back office who were involved in not only setting the contract up, but in the cost control measures, because essentially when a smart contract gets executed, for the people to understand is, right now in the oil industry and any energy industry, you're looking for 30-day payment terms. Normally, when it's the big guys, they'll give you 180 days. Even though, say, 30 days in invoice, you've got to wait that amount of time. So you've got a cost control person chasing that company up every single week for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks to get that money done. When the smart contract's executed, the money is then agreed to be transferred when the goods and services are delivered on site for, say, the operator, say they were looking for cable for our, power cables. So once the power cable's been delivered, the service company suddenly, executes the smart contract, the money gets paid. Now people think, well, is it not better for these big companies to hold on to the money longer? Now, that was the ethos in terms of the financial industry in the past anyway. The money's better in your bank account earning interest than it is in someone else's bank account earning interest. So I'll hold the money as long as possible. Therefore, I would rather pay him in 180 days rather than pay them in, say, 30 days. So why would I want to go to a system whereby I pay them in 0 days? Because essentially, the goods and services have been delivered, they've been verified. Now the smart contract's executed, the money is now transferred to the supplier and the vendor immediately. Well, one thing it does is it speeds up the supply chain. So it improves the supply chain itself. But what it does do is it starts to remove back office. Now, people think, it's like a fixed cost. What AI and this technology is doing for like the energy industry is it's smart contracts is removing fixed costs that they never were able to get rid of before in the past unless there was a merger. So Baker Hughes, they do a merger with Siemens. So suddenly they're two big service companies. Okay, we only need one billing company in India now instead of two. So rather than having 200 people in each company doing billing for us. Now we've merged it and we can have 250 in one office and we get rid of 150 people. So you think what blockchain and smart contracts do is it's starting to get rid of that fixed cost. And if you're a company like Saudi Aramco, who, you say they make 1.1 trillion a year, but, or 2.3 trillion or whatever the figure is of the day, and whatever the kingdom, lets you to believe how much money they're making over a yearly basis, it's still a huge savings on what they're actually doing. But that's only one tiny aspect of it. And it's maybe one of the most basic aspects of blockchain. You know what I mean?
Right.
So suddenly it's like the smart contract comes along. I mean, NFTs come along, non-fungible tokens. What can we use this for? And I think you're right. I think just using the word token might be better because it allows people to understand it. And the word non-fungible, it's confusing for people anyway because they don't even know what that means.
They don't know.
What I mean?
Yeah, they don't.
So you think of the word token coming along and tokenization, but really all that is just a form of NFTs as well, is it not?
It is. Yeah, I mean, an NFT is a token on a blockchain, for
sure. So it's bringing that in. So it's a bit like, as you're saying, it comes back to the Tesla model. It's just like you start to disrupt an industry, but it depends whether the industry adopts it or not, And really he's disrupted an industry when he started making, electric vehicles. So you start looking at early electric vehicles, they were sort of like pretty garbage looking things, little three-wheeler things that zoomed around and they would go like 35 miles an hour. The guy that made ZX Spectrum, Sinclair C5 back in the UK, he had his one kicking around in the 80s, So it's going a long time back. And then obviously, he lost millions on it, the guy developing that, because nobody wanted to use it because it just seemed unsafe, And then Tesla comes along and it suddenly looks cool, The big thing that all the sort of petrol head guys or gas head guys were like, I don't want to get an electric vehicle because it's slow, Suddenly these Teslas, the new ones, are faster. Well, wait a minute. I want something that's faster than that. So he disrupts it. But then what you've found is eventually all the car manufacturers, now they are going into electric vehicles. So you're seeing them everywhere pop on the road. And, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, there'll just be more and more electric vehicles. Not because of the adoption, but just also the fact that they look cool and everybody wants one, So it's just there. But then you look at Tesla, that I think it was the Model Y used to be 94,000. The Model Y today is 82,000. So he's had to reduce the price of his Tesla this year because now there's an oversupply in the market. Now there's more competition coming into the market space as well. They priced the product in. If you bought a Tesla a year ago, you can't even sell that Tesla back to upgrade it because you've signed a contract that you're off paying a vehicle there because you're sort of in negative equity in terms of your Tesla. Sure. And that just again becomes, the challenges for what they're doing is because, before there wasn't enough inventory. Now I was reading yesterday that there's too much inventory and people can't afford to buy Teslas in the same way. So now he has to start to find ways of selling Teslas whereby now you can lease a Tesla. So before you used to have to put down 10 grand, now you can put down 2 grand. Before you used to do that as well, before you're paying 1,200 for the basic one, now you can get away with if you're going to lease it for 500. Well, wait a minute, I can put down 2,000 from a Tesla or 4,000 from a Tesla, and I can pay 500 a month. That's the same as my car payment. I can get a Tesla. Where 2 years ago, unless you were wealthy, there was just no way you were going to come in, and they were looking for the big upfront down payment, and we weren't going to go leasing it as well. And that's sort of, that's the market itself forcing people to do it, when interest rates come out and then people can't borrow money so easily and the market there, then suddenly it's like inventory increases, then there's other companies come in there and it changes it. But he's already disrupted the market, as you said, Julian, so it's changed again,
Yeah. So his big play now is he knows he's not going to beat the global car manufacturers, specifically American and German, or Japanese for that matter. But what he's doing now is the electrical grid in the US. So now if these companies make, or when they make their own electric cars, they will be using Tesla superchargers to charge those cars. So, right, Tesla, being first is huge, right? And so, I think, right, like, so a guy like Elon Musk learned all of these strategies and techniques throughout his entire career, and this is a masterclass of, I don't particularly think that the cars are actually that good. I'm impressed by the motor speed, but the interior and the driving experience is not that impressive uh, for me. Um, and so, I think that what he's done is incredible, right? And building the company. And again, that only comes from an extremely savvy entrepreneur for sure.
Yeah, and you just think, so what do you think his chances are when he has his wrestling match against Mark Zuckerberg? You know, is that
Yeah.
actually going to happen? Is that going to happen, or is it they're just teasing us?
No, I think it's a big tease. I think everybody wants to get in and talk about this because it sounds like a really cool thing. But Mark trains. He does jujitsu, competes. He's always been physically active, like at least the past decade. So Mark is, you don't see Mark go public with too many things, right? And so he talks about this because he's pretty confident, I think, in his abilities. I think Elon is just, he knows, like, if I'm not in the news cycle, what am I doing, right? So I think he's just looking for ways to continually stay in the news cycle, and this is his latest act.
Yeah, that's interesting as well. I know it's like it's everything's sort of at crosshairs, and then from the last thing we'll talk about as we come to end the podcast is sort of the legal issues facing Bitcoin and the exchanges. You've got Binance and Coinbase in trouble with obviously with the SEC.
Yeah.
Prime Trust, who we initially used when we minted our first tokens. So in order for us to buy original Zion coins when we minted them, we had to use Prime Trust. It was essentially a FINRA regulated bank. They were the first ones there, a custodian of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, they had to file Chapter 11 this week, which was to people involved in this. And, every single crowdfunding platform in America was essentially using Prime Trust. They were behind it in terms of if you were going to go through the KYCs, all the early adopters of it, they were all using the technology of this company.
Right.
And then, unfortunately, and that goes all the way back to the FTX. So when FTX went down, they were no longer able to hold their tokens. That they had a knock-on effect on that, and ultimately were unable to recover, even though they were the pioneers of what they were doing in the industry at that time. And it's just so it's super sad to see that. I didn't really know them that well. I was just a customer of theirs, but they were really good guys. They set it up. The technology they're using at the time, going back 2018, 2019 was, the clear leaders in what's happening out there. But there's just a custodian FINRA regulated bank, and they were involved in multiple other things. They've just gone down as well. So what do you think is going to happen going forward right now with the SEC and Coinbase and Binance and all the crypto exchanges, and where's it going to lead to? Because without it getting resolved, it seems crypto in America and blockchain in America is just like at a standstill right now.
Yeah. So back in 2013, I had these feelings, right? That I saw sort of the end game as in, okay, well, either the government is going to release their own centralized sort of token, cryptocurrency, right? Um, or not, right? Like that was it. And, I went through my own sort of crypto winter in my career from about 2014 to about 16, 17, because of that idea. Where we are today is, yeah, I mean, regulation. So there's two separate factions, right? I mean, there's the federal government in general, and then there's the SEC. And so I think the SEC is really just seeing a lot of the things that have gone wrong, all the schemes and scams that have been involved. And all of those touch very close to the general federal government and its elected officials, right? I mean, once these people start running these companies, they start trying to lobby these politicians, hanging out, donating, etc. And so it's the entire image and PR around it looks really bad, right? And that is the major problem. I think today the SEC seems very clear that they kind of want to stop the proliferation of sort of new tokens and new token offerings. And so, right, they're going back and doing the work that they hadn't done the past 5 years, right? So claiming that Ethereum and Bitcoin are commodities, not securities, right? So, okay, that's a cool win, right? And that's why I think you see these bigger financial institutions jumping into Bitcoin, right? Because that's sort of in the clear. But yeah, I mean, in order to foster an ecosystem, we have to be able to develop these different technologies, right? What we're talking about, NFTs and different token offerings, and Solana and Algorand, things like that. And so we need different exchanges, Binance. We need global exchanges, right? And so where do those fit? I think that the governments outside of the U.S. will be very slow or just not interested in sort of stifling or stopping innovation, not for innovation's sake, but just because they either don't care or cannot control those companies. So I think companies outside of the U.S. will continue to grow and establish themselves. Now, in terms of how they operate with us, it's a cat and mouse game with the SEC. Period. I think the SEC is going to have to develop like its own enforcement department just for crypto, maybe its own agency just for crypto, because they can't possibly handle true SEC violations, public securities, and crypto at the same time, right? They like the SEC can barely handle Wall Street fraud as is right now, right? So to sort of throw on all this emerging industry, I think would be laughable. Right? I mean, a lot of things here in the U.S. are cat and mouse game. The IRS, right? Criminality in general with the FBI, and so I think that this is just something that we're kind of used to here in the U.S. But for sure, it will definitely dissuade investors and a new generation of entrepreneurs from thinking about building solutions in the space if there's so much regulatory ambiguity, right? Because I think that that's really the problem. It's no one knows what's going to happen. So you're kind of out there at the behest of whoever's the new sort of commissioner of the SEC or whatever, right? And so that level of uncertainty is maybe something untenable for early stage startup, and most definitely for VC LPs, right? It's just not something you want to do or get involved in. So yeah, I mean, where or how that's changing, I know that there are definitely voices in DC that want to come up with a solution, but even then, they're not that well informed. I was in DC about 3 months ago with Ted Cruz, and Ted Cruz is a politician, a senator, very well known senator, and he had some general ideas and he had some talking points about Bitcoin. But it was very low level, right? It's not had nothing to do with like industry or innovation. Had more to do with like just don't touch my Bitcoin. And that's great that he's talking about it, but we kind of need more action around it. And I didn't really see that coming from the politicians per se.
Yeah, because I think they don't understand it's the technology aspect of it and what's getting created.
You know,
They don't think about the technology. But someone like Elizabeth Warren, so who's been a politician forever, she's anti so many things anyway, coming from the left and wants bigger government. But if you think about her her stance against something like crypto, she just wants, oh well, I mean, you get rid of it basically. It's too late. It's like, the genie's out the bottle. You can't do that. And you've got a place like Switzerland now. Switzerland's basically setting itself up to be the crypto hub in the world. So all their banks, everyone else is getting set up there as well. Cardano is based out of there. The Cardano Foundation, is getting backed by the Swiss government to provide clear regulation and how they identify this digital asset class. So, we had Frederic, who's CEO of Cardano Foundation, on the podcast, and he said, I think it was in the last year, that over 1,000 companies from the US moved out to Switzerland. Blockchain. And these are companies from Silicon Valley, and the companies like leading blockchain companies, crypto-based companies in America, they're just going up and making their international headquarters there. And then you come back to America and we're sort of like behind the curve now. And if you don't do something to catch up and create your own sort of And I know they're starting to put out white papers for this, we've been working with the likes of, you've got Securitized Rialto Markets T0, who run the security token exchanges, which is essentially following the rules of the SEC to create these tokens. The problem with those token exchanges right now is it's just that there's lack of tokens on the exchange, and there's lack of volume on the exchange.
Right.
So that's sort of happening now. You're starting to get funds now coming onto it. So you're getting big funds coming onto it. So people are still able to invest into a fund where before they needed $250,000. Now they can come in through this fund now through tokens for say 50 grand or $5,000 or whatever the lowest they want to do. So that's creating a new way, but it's not really creating market adoption or mass adoption, because it's only for the accredited investors coming in anyway. But accredited investors are starting coming in this way. So tokenization sort of increasing. When we set up this security token to do with oil and gas, again, we're thinking the market adoption back in 2018 and 19 was going to be huge. Now we're 2023, and essentially no one else has done like any form of like oil token. So it's like, the oil industry is not particularly interested in what we're doing right now in terms of what is happening. And B, the market adoption of it is still slow in terms of doing this. But it's like the building blocks are in place for security tokens coming there. The problem that if you go in and suddenly say everything that's been released from now is a security, out with the big few that are commodities, it's like, well, what are they going to be doing for the next 10 years? There's been like 10,000 cryptos released on a place like Uniswap, which for people out there is you go to Uniswap, you can invest in tokens, crypto, etc. But basically everything on there is a security, according to SEC.
Yeah.
So it's like, so if you go onto it, it creates that sort of problems with it as well. So it's just this standstill. So if the quicker they can get sort of black and white instructions for people, it means all the new players can come in and start to like follow the guidelines for that. And then America can again push its way to being a leader in the space, rather than, you're going to fall further and further and further behind. That's all that's going to happen,
Sure. Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, even right now in Silicon Valley, right? Like crypto is the black sheep for sure, right? So, and about every year, I think VC funds deploy about $200 billion, right, in companies. So that's $200 billion that isn't going into crypto, right, as a category, as an innovation. So it's very troubling for sure.
Yeah, so that was the negative sides of challenges facing NFTs, Julian. When we talk about it, there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of challenges ahead anyway. With the economy, there's banks going down. There's, we're in a sort of recession anyway, whether they like it or not. But they're going to come out there in the next few months and announce a recession, so it's going to be difficult. And if you look at crypto as any sort of tech stock, it's going to be difficult for tech stocks anyway. So crypto's even further to the right, would it be, if you want to look at it like that as well, or more high risk as well. So we'll wait and see with that. But outside that as well, what positive things do you think there's going to come from the industry in the next couple of years, just to finish things off and give a little bit of a background about what's going to happen with your company?
Yeah, I think eventually there are going to be some of the companies that follow Coinbase's footsteps. So I think it's important for crypto companies to go public, right? To IPO, right? Have the SEC involved in that process, right? Have cash flow, revenue, build a healthy business, right? And sort of prove the value prop that way. I also think that we're going to just see the combination of AI and blockchain more and more and more, right? Like every month, it's going to be sort of more obvious. And I think, within the AI context, I think blockchain is going to be able to reinvent itself, right? So you can imagine maybe even blockchain's entire ledgers that just, right, are like AI first, right? And like this could be a whole new paradigm, right? Because I think a lot of the L1s that start in a boom are either copycats or marginal improvements, and money sort of gets sunk there, right? But when there's a company or an L1 that has a true revolutionary approach, it has long-standing power. And so I think that the next game changer there is definitely going to be AI for sure.
Perfect. So just to round things off, thanks so much for coming on the show again, Julian. That's been great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to, I guess, the third iteration. I'll be back for sure.
Yeah. So, and hopefully Bitcoin's over 40,000 by then, so things are looking good.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That'd be great. Well, thanks again, Julian. Thanks to everyone out there. You've been watching Boom It's on the Blockchain. My name's Alistair Caithness. Have a nice day.